Security laughed at the human's small meal. The cubs traded portions until her plate towered. The galactic transit station of Corvin Prime served as the largest trading hub in the outer sectors. Thousands of species passed through its massive halls every cycle. Among them walked Maya Chen, the first human nutritionist assigned to the station's refugee processing center. She had arrived 3 weeks ago, and the aliens still watched her like she was some kind of strange creature escaped from a zoo. Maya stepped into the feeding hall carrying her standard ration tray. The room buzzed with activity. Massive Throcan warriors sat at reinforced tables, their plates piled high with enough meat to feed a small village. Slender Vexari merchants nibbled on crystalline fruits the size of basketballs. Even the smallest species present, the insect-like Chikari, consumed portions that seemed enormous compared to their tiny bodies. Maya found an empty spot at a long table and set down her tray. On it sat a modest portion of synthesized protein, some vegetables, and a small container of water. It was perfectly adequate for a human female of her size. Back on Earth, she might have even called it a decent lunch. The security guard stationed near the door noticed her immediately. 3 Throcan males, each standing over 8 feet tall with shoulders as wide as doorways. Their deep, rumbling laughter echoed across the hall. Other diners turned to look. "Look at that," the largest guard bellowed, pointing a thick claw at Maya's tray. "The little soft skin thinks that crumb pile will sustain her." His companions joined in the mockery. "Perhaps humans survive on air. Or maybe they simply shrivel up and blow away in strong wind." Maya felt heat rise to her cheeks, but she kept her expression calm. She had dealt with worse comments during her training. Humans were still new to the galactic community. Many species had never encountered one before. Their assumptions about human biology ranged from wildly inaccurate to completely absurd. She picked up her eating utensil and began to eat. The guards continued their commentary, growing louder with each passing moment. Other diners either joined in the amusement or simply stared with curiosity. Maya focused on her food and tried to ignore them all. Then she noticed the cubs. A group of young aliens had gathered at the table across from her. They belonged to a species Maya recognized as Lumari, refugees from a planet recently devastated by solar storms. Their soft blue fur was matted and dirty. Their large eyes held the hollow look of creatures who had seen too much hardship too young. According to station records, they had been separated from their parents during the evacuation. The refugee center was still trying to locate their families. The cubs stared at Maya with a mixture of fear and fascination. She offered them a gentle smile. One of the smallest cubs, barely reaching Maya's knee in height, clutched a bowl of thick stew. The portion was massive, clearly designed for adult Lumari metabolism. The cub struggled to lift the spoon. Maya's heart ached watching them. She knew from her studies that young Lumari required frequent small meals rather than large, infrequent ones. Whoever had assigned their portions clearly did not understand their species' dietary needs. The cubs would waste most of this food, and they would still go hungry because the nutrients would not absorb properly. She caught the eye of the smallest cub. The little one flinched, but did not look away. Maya pointed at her own small portions, then at her mouth, then gave an exaggerated, satisfied pat to her stomach. The universal gesture seemed to translate. The cub's ears perked up with interest. Maya scooped a small amount of her vegetables onto a napkin and slid it across the table toward the cubs. She held up her hands, showing she meant no harm. The gesture was risky. In some cultures, sharing food with strangers was considered offensive. But these were children, alone and scared, and Maya trusted her instincts. The smallest cub crept forward. It sniffed the vegetables, then took a tiny bite. Its eyes widened with surprise. The other cubs clustered around, watching. The small one chirped something in the Lumari language, and suddenly all of them were reaching for the vegetables. Maya divided her remaining vegetables among them, keeping only a few bites for herself. The cubs devoured the small portions instantly. Their bodies were clearly craving the nutrients their oversized meals could not provide. Then something unexpected happened. The smallest cub picked up its massive bowl of stew and pushed it toward Maya. It chirped again, gesturing at her now empty tray. Another cub did the same, adding a pile of roasted tubers. Then another added some kind of bread. Within moments, Maya's simple tray had disappeared beneath a mountain of food from 6 different cubs, each contributing their oversized portions. The security guards had stopped laughing. The entire feeding hall had fallen silent. Maya stared at the tower of food before her. She looked at the cubs, who watched her with expectant eyes, tails wagging slowly. They had given her everything. In exchange for a handful of vegetables, they had emptied their own plates. She felt tears prick at her eyes. These children had lost their homes, their families, everything they knew. Yet here they were, sharing their food with a strange alien they had never met. Not because they expected anything in return, but simply because she had shown them kindness first. Maya gently pushed the food back toward the cubs. She divided it into smaller portions, showing them how to eat manageable amounts. The cubs caught on quickly. They began passing dishes back and forth, breaking everything into bite-sized pieces. The feeding became a game, with cubs trading items they did not want for items they preferred. Within minutes, the whole group was eating together, sharing everything equally. Maya nibbled on small samples from each dish, discovering flavors she had never encountered. The cubs chirped and squeaked with delight each time she tried something new. One particularly bold cub climbed onto the bench beside her and began braiding her dark hair with tiny claws. The largest security guard approached the table. His shadow fell over Maya like a storm cloud. She tensed, expecting more mockery or perhaps worse. But the Throcan simply stood there, watching the scene before him. "You gave them your food," he said, his voice no longer booming with arrogance. "You had almost nothing, and you gave it away." Maya met his gaze without flinching. "They needed it more than I did." The guard was silent for a long moment. Then slowly he reached for the massive slab of meat on his own plate. He tore off a portion and placed it on the table in front of the cubs. His 2 companions did the same, adding vegetables and fruit from their own meals. Other diners began to notice. A Vexari merchant contributed some of her crystalline fruit. An elderly Chikari shuffled over with a container of sweet nectar. Within minutes, species from across the feeding hall had gathered around the table of cubs, each offering something from their own plates. The cubs squeaked with joy, overwhelmed by the generosity surrounding them. The smallest one crawled into Maya's lap and buried its face in her shirt, trembling with emotion. She held it close, stroking its matted fur. The head of station security arrived 20 minutes later, responding to reports of a disturbance in the feeding hall. What he found was something unprecedented. Dozens of species sat together at tables pushed into one long row. Food was being passed freely. Cubs from multiple refugee families played together underfoot. At the center of it all sat a small human woman surrounded by blue-furred children who refused to leave her side. "What happened here?" the security chief demanded. The largest Throcan guard stood at attention. His expression had changed completely from earlier. Pride had replaced mockery. Respect had replaced scorn. "The human showed us something, sir," he said. "She showed us that sometimes the smallest meal can feed the most hearts." Maya continued helping the cubs eat their shared dinner. She did not need to understand the alien languages swirling around her to recognize what had happened. In trying to help a few hungry children, she had accidentally sparked something much larger. Species who never spoke to each other were now breaking bread together. Enemies were discovering common ground, strangers were becoming friends. This was why humans belonged among the stars, not because they were the strongest or the fastest or the most advanced, But because they understood something that many older species had forgotten, true strength was not measured in the size of your meal or the power of your weapons. True strength lived in the simple act of sharing what little you had with someone who needed it more. The cubs eventually fell asleep in a pile around Maya's feet, their bellies full for the first time since leaving their destroyed homeworld. She sat perfectly still, unwilling to disturb them. The security guard who had mocked her hours ago now stood watch over the sleeping children, his massive form a protective barrier against the world. Maya smiled softly. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The cubs still needed to find their families. The station still faced countless problems. But tonight, in this feeding hall, something beautiful had been born. And it had all started with one small meal.